What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, and before we get started today, I just wanted to give a little precursor as to why I chose to do this video today. Steve Stockton and I were working on a different project, and I came up with this information, and I was like, wait a minute, why don't I just do a video on this? As most of you know, if you come to the fireside chats, I am so incredibly interested in the missing 411 phenomenon. Mainly the college students going missing and ending up in water, but also what's happening to the people in the woods. If you may or may not know, I write the scripts, the missing and the Fae theory, all three parts I've written so far for Missing Persons and Mysteries channel that Steve reads, that you guys love so much. I'm the author. I say that not because I'm bragging. I know they're awesome though. But no, I say that because that's my interest too. I am so incredibly interested in it. I can't get enough info on it. So when I came up with this information for whatever else Steve and I were doing, I haven't done a lot of things like this for this channel. I mainly focus on true crime, but a little bit of paranormal as well. And I don't really know what this kind of stuff, what kind of heading this would fall into. But I think that you guys are going to find it really interesting regardless. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below because I will give you more on it. I have more scripts written like this for other projects. I have so much more information. I'm still reading the David Paulides Missing 411 books, slowly getting through them because I don't have a lot of time to actually read a book. But I hope you enjoy this content, and again, let me know if you don't enjoy it, you're not interested in it. Majority always rules on this channel because I've come to learn that no matter how hard I try, I cannot please everybody. So, majority rules. Do you want to hear more content like this, or are you completely uninterested? The title of it is Feral and Wild Men Cannibals. Now, when I talk about things like wild men and cannibals, when I start hearing even rumors about things like this, families of people just living like this out in the wood, the wild men, the feral people living like this their whole lives, it literally makes me question our very humanity as a species. Did society and what the majority considers socially normal and or acceptable tame us and take away our very instincts and our human nature? Were they to be wild and cannibalistic and feral? Is it the societal norms which taught us that these things are wrong? And are they actually instinctual, a part of our very being with which we've been taught since we were born to deny? At their base, feral humans are simply people who have grown up and lived their entire lives without any human contact aside from possibly other ferals. In some cases, there are families that exist. They usually exist by themselves. There's not like, you know, they build their house or whatever, their hut in the woods and they have neighbors. Usually they stick together in this kind of pack mentality. Would the things they participate in, like cannibalism, be so disgusting and unmentionable to us if it weren't ingrained into our head, basically, as I just said, from the moment we're born, that it's just those very things that are wrong and taboo and, well, freaking gross. So let's take a closer look at these alleged sightings of wild and feral people and communities, which seem to be actually either springing up more and more in recent years or just being more out in the open. Maybe they're not springing up more. Maybe they've always been this way. There's always been so many, but now that we as other or regular normal, what's normal, right? Humans are aware of them more. We simply are noticing the signs of them being around, or we're simply noticing them more, or at the very least taking the blame for what's going on with these missing clusters, the missing people in the wilderness, the missing children, the missing hunters, the missing, right? The missing in the woods. You guys know what I'm talking about. These communities and lone people, though, are all over the world, in all of the forests, all of the deepest, darkest depths of all of the woodlands that you can possibly think of. Sometimes they're even raised by animals like wolves And therefore, they're without any kind of real human instinct, right? Their instincts are wolf-like instincts. Their instinct is that of a wild beast, a feral animal who will attack at the scent of any human and or their blood. And this is most likely why these people are being blamed for so many of the missing clusters. Are they responsible? I know in at least one instance, well, I know of like at least a handful, but in one instance we're going to briefly speak about today, they very well could be the blame. One of the earliest reported accounts of a feral human is a somewhat obscure tale of a bizarre individual. I mean, do we even call them humans at this point? I don't know. But this bizarre individual came to be known as Wild Peter. In 1724 in Germany, some men were hunting in the deep woods, and what they were hunting for kind of got lost to time and retelling. But what they came upon that day has never been forgotten. Imagine how shocked and startled and surprised these men were when out of some deep and very thick woods emerged a small boy. The boy was on all fours like some kind of animal, and at first, he was only recognized by the men as, quote, a naked, brownish, black-haired creature, end quote. The men were absolutely astonished, and they tried their very best to coax the wild boy out of the thicket because they wanted to capture him. I don't know why they wanted to capture him, maybe because they wanted to help him, but in 1724 Germany, some hunters, maybe they didn't have the best intentions, I don't know. You know how wolves have instincts when someone is hunting them? Maybe this boy had a bad feeling because the boy would not be caught that day. He was smart and wily enough to know when danger was afoot. And even if the men weren't dangerous per se, I'm sure this boy was just as scared and shocked and astonished to see these men as they were to see him. He's feral. He's wild. He doesn't know humans or humanity. I think it's smart to know at least some history, so maybe we can come to some kind of acceptance that these things, these wild people, do exist all around the world. In fact, they exist everywhere that all of these people are going missing in the woods, never to be found. Could there possibly be a link between this and the missing shoes? Wild ferals do not wear shoes, sneakers, I'm sure. So if they capture you, are they going to allow you to wear them? Just a thought. So these men estimated that this young boy was about 12 years old, and when they reported what they'd seen, they found that they were not the only ones who had seen this boy creature. Many other townspeople where they lived had seen this little boy. He had basically been a haunt to the area for a very long time and was even known to climb trees with the ease of a bear, though he snarled and growled and walked on all fours like a wolf. And I guess like a bear does too. This child was eventually caught by a group of different hunters, and they brought him to King George I, who happened to be visiting the area at that time that they captured him. The king was fascinated by the child, who was particularly fond of eating raw vegetables, raw meats, and who had no concept or knowledge of speech, and who seemed to love to tear apart and devour live birds, live small animals as well, like field mice, chipmunkins, and squirrels. King George actually came to love the little wild boy, and he's the one who named him Peter. So Wild Peter was shipped off to England to be studied by the best and most well-respected academics that 1724 England had to offer. The thing about Peter, though, is that he was also a pickpocket. He was a thief. Now, just breaking from my script for a minute, if he's feral and wild, who taught him how to be a pickpocket? Not a wolf, not a bear, right? Not a fox. There had to be, in my opinion, another feral who taught him this. Animals are not purposeful thieves. They might come to your property and steal your food if you have it out, or bears might go into your camp and get into your food and drink. Raccoons, you know, it goes on, but they don't purposefully steal from you, like picking your pocket. If Wild Peter had no concept of human morals, of speech, how did he have a concept of money, of material possessions, of theft? And it's not only said that he was a pickpocket, it's said that he was an accomplished pickpocket. So anyway, Wild Peter absolutely abhorred being bathed. He would not eat anything cooked, including bread. And what's my point of telling the tale of Wild Peter? Just to show that this has been going on for centuries. I couldn't find an earlier report, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. That doesn't mean that, you know, in the year 325, there weren't wild ferals. In my opinion, and many people who study this phenomenon, can you call it that? This has been going on since the dawn of time. In my opinion, though, with the advancement of technology, mainly cameras like trail cams, even Ring doorbells, our cell phones right in our pocket. So if we see something like this, we can pull it out and take a picture. It's becoming harder and harder for these feral wild humans to hide. It's becoming harder for them to stay off our radar. So anyways, let's get back to the Smokies. On July 13th, 1973, a seasonal national park ranger named Charles Hughes had a violent encounter with who is known as, quote, the Wild Man of Cataloochee, end quote. This ranger, Charles Hughes, was checking on some fishermen to kind of make sure that they had their fishing licenses on them in the Smokies, and he encountered a large man with a heavy beard and a fly rod. Hughes asked for the man's name and asked him whether or not he had a license to be fishing where he was. The man replied, quote, I've got no name. I've lived in these woods all my life, end quote. When asked about the fishing license, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol. Remember, I'm not talking here about just feral. I'm also talking about wild men. I think although they are one and the same, they can also be very different. So this was a wild man, quote, the Wild Man of Cataloochee, end quote. Though the ranger was able to disarm the man during the scuffle, he wasn't able to fully subdue him. And as Hughes tried to drive off in his Jeep to go and get assistance in detaining this man, a giant rock was thrown through the Jeep's window. Hughes was able to get to a nearby station for backup, and a large group of rangers and volunteers used bloodhounds and tracked the wild man well into the night. Like, they weren't stopping. They wanted this guy, this wild man. Despite all of these efforts, though, and all of the time put into trying to track and find this man to be able to detain him, they actually weren't ever able to even come up with a trace of him. Like, no proof other than Charles Hughes' word that this man had ever been there. Subsequently, of course, a popular song came out of the encounter, and of course, much discussion and speculation about the encounter came out in public and through the press. This story and more live on and have been added to and exaggerated upon to this very day. Despite the additions to the story, the fact remains the same, though. These men and children, and even women, do exist, and they are seemingly, most of the time, very dangerous to encounter. Why are they very dangerous? Because they don't know anything about us. They could be just as scared of us as we would be of them. There's another side to all of this too, though. So far, we've been talking about the feral and wild people who have lived their entire lives in the wilderness and have no idea of civilization. Some of them were even taken in and raised by wild and deadly animals, as I mentioned earlier. This seems to defy Mother Nature herself. But what about the people who choose to, quote, live off grid, end quote, and purposefully set out to live wild and possibly even purposefully set out to live feral? There are so many reports, especially in recent years. The reports are like on the rise, these sightings of these wild and feral people. Does the ease with which these people are able to accomplish living off the grid and their ability to just slip out of life into no contact with humanity, no creature comforts or worldly pleasures, just show us that we are but one step, maybe even one accidental slip on a banana peel from being this way in the first place. Are we this close to being like them? I mean, if they can so easily give up everything and go live this way, do you think this is a sign of possible mental illness, someone who chooses to live off grid? I personally don't, but this is another thing that's been speculated. Do you have to have a certain type of personality? Of course. But does that mean you have to have mental illness? I don't think so. Let me know if you would be able to go and live off grid. I'm not necessarily saying wild or feral, but just as a fun note, would you be able to live, say, for a year in a remote cabin in the woods where you had to hunt for your own food and drink. You could not have any creature comforts at all, just base. I'm talking washing your clothes, washing your body in like the river. I don't know, guys. You guys know what I'm talking about. I would love to hear from you guys. Would you be able to do that? I don't know if I would. I think that I would, but for an entire year, man, for my entire life, I don't think so. So anyways, the concept of living like this is so foreign for most people. Like, they can't even fathom it. But it fascinates us nonetheless, right? Because here we are, I'm doing this video, I researched this information, I took the time because why? It interests me, and I hope it interests you. It's one of those things that both fascinates and terrifies us all at the same time. A man named Jeff Holland has a rather famous account of his encounter with a feral human in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, which he describes in detail in his book, Wild Kentucky. Appalachian, I'm from North Jersey. Sorry, Steve. Jeff Holland's encounter happened right near Cloud Splitter Rock in 1990. He says he encountered a white male in his mid to late 30s, naked, but for being covered in leaves, mud, and vines. These things, the leaves, the muds, the vines, were also matted into his hair and beard, both of which were absolutely disgustingly filthy, completely unkempt, as much of the young man's appearance was. So he was really gross. Like, his whole appearance, not just the matted mud and leaves and all that in his hair, he was just absolutely despicably disgusting. No washing in the river for this wild man. Holland even described the man as having a, quote, absurd swamp-like appearance, end quote. And the wild man's walk was ape-like and hunched over. After maintaining eye contact for, quote, what seemed like an eternity, end quote, the ape-like feral man turned and ran off into the depths of the woods and forest. And this brought up a really interesting thought for me. Is this how they're able to kidnap and stalk humans so easily? That's the second time we've heard of this kind of inhuman, maybe supernatural speed with which these guys move. And they walk hunched over and ape-like or crawl on all fours, yet they're most likely responsible for many of the disappearances in the woods. Not something supernatural per se, but these things, these people, I hesitate to call them things because they're humans and, you know, humans aren't things, but I hesitate to call them humans because they're not technically, I don't know. Think about for a minute the description that Jeff Holland and the other hunters, and if you've heard about this before, many other people give of these people. It came to my attention how easily they would just blend into the environment, just kind of become part of the background in the woods. I have a pretty strong and even strange feeling that if these people do not want to be seen, they won't be seen by us. Of course, anything's possible, and every now and again, they're caught by surprise, but the reports are almost always the same, with few exceptions here and there, that they turn and run at this almost, like I said, inhuman, kind of supernatural, cat-like speed back into the wilderness from which they came. It brings me back to Dennis Martin and the wild man the Key family had described in their witness report, and they did describe, quote, a wild man, end quote, in their report. A park ranger had been attacked by such a man just 1 year earlier in the exact same spot from where Mr. Key had observed this thing with, quote, something on its back, end quote. I've come to believe, and many people have come to believe, that this something on his back was in fact Dennis Martin. When trying to sift through what's fact from fiction, what's real and what's fantasy, we do have to keep in mind here what the Great Smokies were way before they were a national park. The Great Smokies were actually a mountain range which was full of communities, and these communities were thriving. So there were people living on the Great Smoky Mountain Range, in the Great Smoky Mountain Range, and the way that they were living is how we would describe today as off the grid. But it wasn't off grid for them. That's just how they were living. And again, they were thriving. The communities such as Cades Cove and Cataloochee. If you go all the way back to the 1700s, you'll find a very different atmosphere than today. And that's putting it very lightly. That's like the understatement of the century. Hernando de Soto discovered the Cherokee tribes in the Smokies during the 1540 exploration, which brought about the European settlers into the area. Those of the Cherokee who did not want to adapt and conform to the European culture of the time were forced to go to Oklahoma, which is what we call today the Trail of Tears, is the route or trail which they took from the Great Smokies through to Oklahoma because they were cast out for nonconformance. If you fast forward to the early 1900s, you'll see people finally starting to utilize the beautiful and bountiful resources of the land there. They were farming, hunting, raising livestock, and even cutting down trees to build their own homes and to build whatever they needed in the community. They were living off the land. Again, what we would call off-grid. This is when forests started becoming towns and pastures, and you won't see any of them there today. As years went by, farming gave way to lumbering, though, and as the logging towns began popping up all over the Smokies, inevitably the geography started to change. It started to transform because much of the forest had actually been cleared away, and they weren't replanting anything to grow in its place. So they would be cutting down all these trees for the lumbering industry to build their houses, like I just said, the businesses, whatever, but they weren't putting anything in its place. So they were just kind of, do you guys ever see that movie, The Lorax? That's kind of what, when I did the research, that's what this reminded me of. At the rate they were clearing and logging, because, again, they weren't replanting anything, the trees would have become extinct and there would be no national forest like we know today, at least not in the Great Smokies, but I think this was going on throughout all the mountain ranges throughout the United States, possibly other countries. I didn't dive that deep. In 1934, Congress and Franklin Roosevelt chartered and dedicated the park to protect it from being cleared and built on anymore. Is it that much of a stretch to believe that some people are more interested in living as the ancestors did in the Smokies back in the 15, 16, and 1700s and so on? Is it that much of a stretch to think that some people still maintain that kind of lifestyle, at least to the best that they can? And it's even easier to do now because there's not a whole community of them. They don't have to stand out. That's all I have for you today, guys. Just a little teaser. Again, I want to know your opinion. Do you want to see more of this? Do you want me to dive deeper on the feral wild men and the missing clusters of people? Do you want me to just get into the culture? Do you want me to get into myth and legends? Let me know. Please be sure to check out the description box for some links, not just on how to financially support the channel, which you will find my Patreon and PayPal information there. Just click to make a donation, either monthly or one time. You will also find links to the few live streams that Steve Stockton and I do throughout the week. The live stream from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Zombified's channel, we do a series called Real Evil, where we cover real evil. We've covered mothers that kill, men that kill women, lady killers. We've covered kids who kill. I mean, we've done 5 or 6 episodes. It's been super popular so far, so I'll leave a link to one of those in the description box. Also, Steve Stockton's Campfire Tales on Friday nights from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I've been kind of co-hosting with him on those. I will leave a link to one of the ones that I did. It's really interesting. Normally, we're interviewing someone that's a part of the paranormal world, whether it's a psychic, whether it's an author, whether it's someone from another paranormal YouTube channel. We've all got to stick together and support each other in this community. There'll be a link to one of those. And last but definitely not least, there will be a link to mine and Steve's Sunday night live stream, our fireside chat, where we just involve whoever is in the chat with what we're doing. We talk to you guys. We want to know your opinions. That's where I came up with the near-death experiences. I don't know if this is going to go out before or after that. We'll see how it goes. But we take your opinions and we implement them. We want to know what you want from us because, after all, without you guys, what's the point of this, right? We would just be people researching and reading for ourselves. So we want to bring you the best possible content that you're the most interested in. So that's from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Sunday nights, and it's called Fireside Chat with Steve and Gemma. Please come in, come sit fireside with us. Grab a cup of hot cocoa or whatever your hot beverage of choice is and come and chill with us. It's a really fun time. We laugh, we joke. Sometimes we do get serious and talk about the paranormal. We talk about the missing. We talk about everything and nothing all at the same time. Some people absolutely love it and won't miss it for anything. Some people really despise it. If you despise it and it's not for you, that's fine. Go and check out something else. Also, I'll leave the link to mine and Steve's podcast, which we did a few episodes and took a really long hiatus because we're working on so many other more things that are more pressing right now. But I will leave a link to Strange Things with Steve Stockton and Gemma Jade in the description box as well. Be sure to run through, subscribe to all the channels these live streams are on, click the like button, leave a comment, share it, spread the love, help me get my 1,000 subscribers, please. I love you guys so much, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. Have your best day, have your best night, be your best self, be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything. It can make you feel so good and gain you so much. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much to my beautiful, wonderful patrons. And I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget, let me know if you want to hear more. Mwah. Bye, guys.